Fire Creek, a western made by a bunch of guys that were making their living at Gunsmoke, and Fire Creek is basically Gunsmoke.
Can't hear you.
And Cheyenne Social Club, directed by that master of the Western form, Gene Kelly. But they wanted to work together, so they did it anyway. The first picture, On Our Merry Way, is a multi-part picture. It tells 4 different short stories with it. And like any multi-part picture, there's one that's really good, there's one that's just awful, and there are a couple that are, yeah, okay. So rather than subject you to the entire 100 minutes, we're just going to show you the Fonda Stewart episode, which is by far the best thing in the picture. It involves a couple of musicians who are neither very good musicians nor very smart. They're on the road with their catch-as-catch-can dance band when their car breaks down and they need to get money to repair the car, and hence lies the story. The script was written by John O'Hara. It was directed by George Stevens. O'Hara was a friend of Fonda's. Fonda's favorite novel was Appointment in Samara, O'Hara's first novel. Fonda was a closet intellectual, although if you asked him, he wouldn't admit to it, but he actually was a closet intellectual. And he and O'Hara had been friends for some time. So O'Hara did it as a lark. Stevens, Fonda, and Stewart came to the picture after their service in World War II, which was excruciating for all of them for different reasons. Fonda had been in the South Pacific in naval intelligence, hopping from island to island as the Allies advanced towards Japan. Stewart, of course, had been in Europe, flying out of England, B-24 bombing flights over Germany, Belgium, and France. George Stevens had been photographing the army as it moved through Italy and Germany, finally liberating concentration camps at Dachau and Auschwitz. All of them came out of the war wondering what they were doing in the movie business. Because once you've seen the true horror of what human beings are capable of doing to each other, what exactly is the point of playing dress-up? And they all had various issues with going back into the movie industry. Stewart probably semi-seriously, Stevens extraordinarily seriously. This is the last comedy George Stevens would ever direct. It was done as a lark. He didn't take credit for it. The film was made on a kind of ad hoc basis. It was produced by Burgess Meredith, who wanted to move into production, and by Benedict Bogus, whose name is an anagram for laundered money. It took a long time to pull together. The credited directors were Leslie Fenton and King Veter. But as I said, Stevens directed the Fonda Stewart segment, and John Huston directed one small sequence in the picture. He was going to direct the Fonda Stewart sequence, but then he got called away because he was John Huston, and he was always willing to follow a will-o'-the-wisp wherever it led him. So Stevens came in and subbed him out. Those of you who've seen Fonda in Lady Eve know that he was an extraordinarily gifted physical comedian, up to and including pratfalls. Unfortunately, he didn't get a lot of chance to express that aspect of his personality, because almost from the beginning of his film career, he was playing Abe Lincoln and Tom Joad and Wyatt Earp, and before you know it, he was typecast as the conscience of humanity. So he wanted to do more comedy, but he didn't really get the option. He never got a lot of offers. So he leapt at this, as did Stewart, because it was a chance for them to work together. Now, by this time, they'd been best friends for 14 years, 15 years. They bonded, they moved in together in 1932, starving actors in New York City. The pit of the Depression, neither one of them was getting any work. Josh Logan was part of a kind of frat house atmosphere. Burgess Meredith would come in and out. Myron McCormick would come in and out. Whoever was working got in bed. Whoever wasn't working had to take a couch. They lived on rice. Basically, it was the same pattern that starving artists have existed within for thousands of years. Fonda went to Hollywood first. Stewart followed about 6 months later, and they moved together again in Brentwood. And they stayed together for 2 more years until Fonda got married for the second time. So this was a chance for them to work together, and they never actually worked together before. Their relationship was and remains fascinating. They were best friends. They were absolutely devoted to each other, and they didn't talk that much. Peter Fonda told me after the war, they would be sitting together building radio-controlled airplanes with wingspans of like 7 feet, big, huge things. And they'd sit there for 2 or 3 hours, and the only conversation was, please pass me the glue. Or, do you have part C-27 over there? You do? Please give it to me. And that was all he would say. And Peter would sit there fascinated by the concentration and the calm mood in the room, because neither of them was particularly calm left to their own devices. But when they were together, they each calmed the other down. It was a very interesting relationship, and it was subverbal because they didn't talk that much. And that's captured in their segment of On Our Merry Way. As I said, they're playing a couple of busted out, not terribly talented musicians, and they communicate with a kind of mumbled sotto voce phrase here or there. And each of them seems to know what the other one means, even though we're not too sure. But their meaning becomes clear as the segment goes on. Also featured in the segment are Harry James, who doesn't really need to be there, but it's good to see him. And Carl Switzer, Alfalfa Switzer, who plays a major supporting part, who's very funny. Once you see it, you'll understand basically what Stevens does. And you guys know that Stevens started out as a cameraman at the Roach Studio, where he shot a lot of Al Roach, Laurel and Hardy comedies. And what he does is essentially turn Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart into Stan Laurel and Hardy. Each of them thinks the other one is not as smart as they are. Neither of them is really very smart. And they get deeper and deeper and deeper into the oatmeal. That's the premise. Once you see it, you'll just be sad that Fonda didn't get a chance to do more comedy. The second feature is a very special treat. It's called Cindy's Fella. Now, Jimmy Stewart made this in 1959. He didn't do a lot of television except as a gesture to a friend. He and his wife Gloria would do occasional guest spots on the Jack Benny show because Jack Benny lived a block down from their house on Roxbury, and they saw each other socially, and everybody loved Jack Benny and everybody loved Jimmy Stewart. So it was a familial relationship. So they did a bunch of Jack Benny shows. He did a TV film for John Ford because, well, it's John Ford. You don't say no to John Ford if you don't keep working in show business. And he did this, which was a gesture to Lou Wasserman. Now, both Fonda and Stewart were represented by Leland Hayward from the time they got to Hollywood through World War II. During the war, Fonda's in the South Pacific, Stewart's in Europe flying bombers. Leland Hayward sold his agency to MCA, which the number 2 man in MCA was Lou Wasserman. By the time he made Cindy's Fella in '59, Lou Wasserman was running MCA, and in 1958 it bought Universal Pictures. And he began the process of upgrading the product of Universal Pictures, which, as far as the mid-50s was concerned, was still grinding out Abbott and Costello Pictures and Ma and Pa Kettle Pictures. Wasserman brought Stewart over on a contract basis. Stewart was the horse that brought in Cary Grant to production capacity at Universal, followed by Gregory Peck, followed by Marlon Brando, followed by a bunch of other people in order to turn Universal into a major studio. So it was a favor to Wasserman. Along the way, after Wasserman bought Leland Hayward's agency, he made Stewart one of the richest actors in Hollywood. Even by the standards of American show business, Stewart made a huge amount of money because of the deals Wasserman set up for him. Ownership of pieces of movies like Rear Window, the Glenn Miller Story. Stewart had not just percentages, but ownership in some of these pictures. He became extremely wealthy. Stewart was also a film collector. He had prints, contractually, 16 million prints of every film he was in after he got out of World War II. Stewart's daughter, Kelly, I asked Kelly about this film, Cindy's Fella, and what I got back was the email equivalent of a blank stare. She'd never seen it, or if she had seen it, she didn't remember it. But Wasserman had put together a package deal for this series of one-hour specials, I believe it was NBC, and what better way to get the show off to a big rating than by getting Jimmy Stewart to front one of the early episodes. So Stewart came on and did this as a favor to Wasserman. Stewart would get 16 millimeter color prints of the films he starred in after the war. And they're all in Brigham Young. And is Ivy Tech Prince of Vertigo, of The Greatest Show on Earth, Bell Book and Candle are stunning. I've seen some of them and they're breathtaking. This, in 1959, was shot in color, which is an example of how much Wasserman was putting into it, because very little television in 1959 was shot in color. I don't think Bonanza came on the air until 1960, but this was shot in color. The co-star is George Gobel, who's charming, and seems to be doing a kind of Harry Langdon thing. The leading lady is Lois Smith, who made her premiere in Elia Kazan's East of Eden, a small part, and she was kind of going to be a star, but didn't quite become a star, and she's still a working actress, and a brilliant working actress. She was in a film last year that was talk of nominating her for an Oscar. It didn't quite happen, but she's still out there working well into her 80s. The film from the color had turned on the print, but they corrected it very young, so we're seeing a very good-looking film. You will note that it's also quite lavish for a television film from 1959. That's again because Wasserman was spending whatever needed to be spent in order to make this series look good and to make Jimmy look good, because he wasn't going to sell his #1 client down the road. To direct it, he got Gower Champion. Now, Gower Champion never made much of a dent in the movie business or the TV business. Of course, he had a huge theater career with I Do, Hello Dolly, 42nd Street, major hits. But this is an extremely well-directed film. And the music is by Conrad Salinger, who was the major arranger at the Arthur Freed unit at MGM. So it's prime talent all the way. And what the interesting thing about it is Stewart made this in between doing Bell Book and Candle with Kim Novak and Anatomy of a Murder with Otto Preminger. And you might think that, well, it's a TV movie, it's a favor, I'll walk through it. No. Jimmy Stewart didn't walk through anything. He's putting full out into this charming, charming story that is somewhere between Finian's Rainbow and, yeah, Cinderella. It's a really lovely film. I just got such a kick out of seeing it. I'm going to see if I can get a copy to send to Kelly Stewart. I'm sure she'll get a kick out of it, and her siblings will as well. And you guys are all really lucky to be able to sit here in Columbus, Ohio, thanks to Michael, and to see Cindy's Fella and this Fonda Stewart segment from On Our Merry Way. Enjoy.